Hello, everybody. I'm Howie Hawkins. I was the Green Party and the Socialist Party candidate for president in 2020. And this podcast, Green Socialist Notes, is about continuing to educate and organize around the eco-socialist program that my running mate, Angela Walker, and I ran on in 2020. And here we are in 2024, and we have a presidential race, which is, they just keep getting worse and worse. The two corporate party system has given us a miserable choice between a neoliberal corporate militarist, Joe Biden, and a neo-fascist criminal maniac, Donald Trump. And both are obviously physically and mentally unfit and declining. And now the Democratic Party is in crisis. It can't make up its mind whether to stick with Biden or replace him. And I think because of that, Biden is really in a hard spot. He still could win, but this is going to undermine his standing with the voters. He's not going to be able to erase the concerns that a strong majority of Americans have that he's no longer capable of being a president for 4 more years. And the longer he stays in, the deeper the crisis in the Democratic Party will become, even if the people that say he should be replaced go silent. But do the leaders of the Democratic Party, the wealthy donors, the members of Congress, the Clintons and the Obamas, the top echelons, do they have the guts to tell Biden he has to go? And even the progressives, Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez have come out strongly for Biden from the start. They didn't make any demands. They just endorsed him. And still now, we had a statement from AOC this week, and Sanders has an op-ed in the New York Times today extolling Joe Biden. The only progressive that has, she hadn't come out against him, but she hadn't come out for him is Rashida Tlaib, which is, understandable given that, her Palestinian family and friends in Gaza, how could she support Joe Biden given how he's a full partner in the genocide? Most of the policy differences of the progressives are with the centrist Biden, but they're supporting him. So it looks like the Democrats are not going to have the guts to get a stronger candidate to head their ticket. And looking at this, the Democratic leadership is as cautious, conformist, conservative, and gutless as the Republican leadership is, being afraid of this felonious fool called Donald Trump. So I'm still hoping Biden will step aside or be forced to step aside, and the Democrats will have an open process leading up to a contested convention. An old-fashioned contested convention would have the whole country transfixed. And I think the Democrats would unite behind whoever they decided, the delegates decided to nominate the whole ticket, and it would be a far more vigorous and articulate campaign than Biden and Harris can mount against Trump. It's clear that the Trump administration wants Biden in there. I think they see his weaknesses. Now, a lot of people are saying, particularly those asking Biden to step aside, is that it's hopeless with him at the top. It's really not. The polls and the betting markets show it's a close race for the popular vote. The difference in the polls is the margin of error. They didn't move much after the debate, we can see now. The problem is the Electoral College tilts heavily toward Trump. Remember in 2016, Clinton won the popular vote by 3 million votes and 2%, yet Trump won the Electoral College. In 2020, Biden won the popular vote by 7 million votes, 4.5%. And still, Trump almost took power through the Electoral College. If as few as 21,462 votes in Arizona, Georgia, and Wisconsin had flipped from Biden to Trump, the electoral vote would have been tied, 269 to 269. That would have thrown, under the Constitution, the presidential election to the House for a one-state, one-vote decision. And the Republicans controlled 26 of the 50 delegations. They had the majority, so the Republicans would have chosen Trump. And when you think about it, the Republicans have only won the popular vote once in the last 36 years since 1988, when George H.W. Bush won. And, in 2004, when his son, George W. Bush, won, that was the only time Republicans won the popular vote. That was in the middle of the Iraq War, when people had rallied around the flag, and, Bush was the guy in, and Kerry was a pro-war candidate anyway. So that tells you that Republicans have a hell of a hard time winning the presidency, or at least the popular vote at this time. In fact, the only way they've won the first time in the 21st century is when they lost the popular vote but won the electoral college. That was George W. Bush in 2000 and Donald Trump in 2016. So you would think that the Democrats would realize they got a problem and they'd have worked to eliminate the electoral college. But no, they blame the Greens for that. And, say we're spoiling the election. Jill Stein's calling for that change, replace the electoral college with a ranked choice national popular vote. That's where we need to go. Unfortunately, she's not getting much traction in the media. Now, I'm going to be voting for Stein to express my support for the Green Party as an alternative to these terrible choices that Democrats and Republicans give us. And I'll be using my vote as my voice for electoral reforms to create an inclusive multi-party democracy based on ranked choice voting for executive offices and proportional ranked choice voting for legislative bodies to create proportional representation. I'll be voting for the eco-socialist Green New Deal to address the climate crisis, for the Economic Bill of Rights to eliminate poverty and economic hardship and insecurity, for an end to the arms to Israel as long as it's committing genocide in Gaza and maintaining apartheid and occupation in Palestine. And I could go through a whole lot of issues that, Jill and the Green Party is right on. My support for Jill, however, is critical because of her position on Ukraine, which is as hypocritical as Biden's position on Israel. Both talk about supporting human rights, democracy, and international law, but Stein is making an exception for Russia's war crimes against Ukrainians, just as Biden is making an exception for Israel's war crimes against the Palestinians. And in Biden's case, a whole lot of other foreign policy issues where they're, war crimes or at least human rights abuses being committed by countries the U.S. supports militarily, like Morocco in Western Sahara or Indonesia in West Papua. And I could go on and on. So, my vote will be a critical vote, more to support the Green Party as the only national independent left party than as a vote for Jill Stein as a candidate. And if you want to read more about my thoughts on that question, we'll put in the chat an article just published in New Politics called Socialists Should Advance Our Own Politics in 2024. A slightly edited version of that is coming out in the Solidarity webzine and in a British publication called Workers' Liberty. But those haven't been published yet as far as I know. So meanwhile, while this mess is going on in the presidential election, the genocide in Gaza, every time I look at BBC and they show film of, what the Palestinians are going through and what the latest, military offensive by Israel have wrought, I can hardly watch it. It is disgusting. And that slaughter continues unabated. And it's obvious that Netanyahu is not going to agree to a ceasefire and the release of Israeli hostages for Palestinian prisoners because he wants to stay in power. If the war ends, his coalition falls apart, he won't get back into power in new elections. And then he's going to have to face criminal indictments against him for accepting bribes and committing fraud. And so he's continuing a war to keep his ass out of jail. No wonder Netanyahu supports Trump. They're two peas in a pod. They have so much in common. But the fecklessness of Biden, letting himself get played by Netanyahu, is pathetic to watch as well. And it shows Biden really has no moral backbone. He keeps saying, well, we're telling them not to, to minimize the civilian casualties, and we won't send them 2,000-pound bombs where we just send them a load of 500-pound bombs. We are arming Israel for this genocide. It makes the U.S. a full partner. And the foreign policy implications of that, it is so stupid from the U.S. point of view. We are losing the respect and alliances of countries all over the world because they're appalled at what Israel's doing in Gaza. So on the other side, the street protests against U.S. Supporting Israel's genocide have largely gone on summer vacation, and that's a shame. What I'm going to suggest is that we need to be focused on the congressional election campaigns. They give us the best opportunity to influence policy on this issue. Candidate events, street protests targeting the congressional candidates, leaflets doing the same, letters to the editor, news releases, any public forum where it's appropriate to bring this issue up are all ways to push the issue into the elections. We got to make these candidates for Congress, whether or not we got a green in the race, and unfortunately we don't have enough. We got to make them deal with this issue and let them know that people do not want the U.S. supporting genocide. And if we're going to move this country away from its Israel right or wrong policy, Congress is a lever. It's a lever for change. It's a weather vane telling us where we stand. And we have a long way to go. In April, when they voted on the $26 billion supplemental military aid to Israel, only 37 Democrats voted against it. And they also voted, well, the 173 Democrats that voted for it also voted to cut off aid to UNRWA, which is where humanitarian aid, food, housing, medical support, education goes to Palestinian refugees, not just in Gaza, but in Jordan, in the West Bank, in Syria and Lebanon. And cutting that off is just cruel. Now, 21 Republicans also voted against that supplemental military aid to Israel, but they did so not because Israel's committing genocide, but they're just ultra-conservative wingnuts who, vote against almost every spending bill. So, we basically, out of 435 members of the House, we got 37 with us on this issue. And they're not really fully with us on this issue. So we got a long way to go. But on the other hand, Congress is the lever if we're going to change U.S. policy. And I suggest that these congressional races are where we can have an impact this summer before maybe the protests pick up again when the colleges are back in session. And so let me talk about another thing. Last week, I talked about legislation in Congress to reverse the Supreme Court's repeal of the Chevron doctrine, which is a decision that guts the ability of federal agencies to promulgate regulations to enforce federal laws affecting worker and consumer rights and public and environmental health. And, I wondered, there's some bills that will give that power back to the agency. So I wonder what Congress could do to reverse the Supreme Court's immunity decision that gives the president absolute immunity for criminal acts. Can't believe I'm saying that. If they're done as, president's official in his official capacities. It's just astounding that we're sitting here and the president's been given absolute immunity. Well, this week we saw some signs of life in Congress about this issue, some initiatives to remedy this awful autocratic ruling. In the Senate, Majority Leader Charles Schumer, Democrat of New York, announced he will introduce a law to classify Trump's election subversion acts as unofficial acts that are not subject to legal immunity. So that deals with one issue. Representative Joe Morrell, who's also from New York, a Democrat from Rochester, announced he's going to introduce a constitutional amendment to say that the president and all public officials are not immune from criminal liability like every other American is. And that sounds to me like where we should go. And, I'm just going to close by saying, going back to Congress, these are also issues relating to the Chevron doctrine and the immunity decision that we should inject into the House races and demand that, these candidates support those legislations to remedy those two decisions. And what I'm arguing is we have a much better opportunity to push our national politics in congressional elections than in presidential elections. The media and public events are accessible to us. The presidential election and most Senate elections, particularly in the big states, are at a stratospheric level. Billions of dollars are involved in campaign funds, and the mainstream corporate media just doesn't give us access. They don't give us a voice. But in congressional races, it's different, particularly the House elections. Candidate town halls, street protests, leafleting, targeting the congressional election, letters to the editor, news releases, much more. And this is something Ralph Nader's been preaching for years, that our best way to influence national politics is to work on our representatives in the House. And I think he's right. That's where we can still have some leverage. The best way would be to have serious Green candidates in these House races, which gives them a legitimate platform. They get in debates, or at least they can fight to get into debates. They can be covered by the media. We need to have more House candidates in future elections if we really are serious about changing national policy. So my closing point today is that the House elections are the best terrain for the Green Party to influence national politics. And it won't be until the Greens have a caucus in the House of Representatives that our presidential candidate will have to be taken seriously by the press and the public. So a little shorter this week than last week, but I hope that gives us plenty to talk about. I'm sure you have things you want to talk about. So let's go to your comments and questions. Ricky Justiniano. I loved and supported your campaign in 2020. As a curious voter, for options available that are terrible, can you give us some insight on RFK's campaign? I think Robert Kennedy is a nutcase. I mean, he's preaching a lot of Trumpian themes, scapegoating immigrants, total support for Israel's war of genocide. He's got, I got a call from a guest in the future. I don't know why he's calling me during the podcast, but I'll call him back. What else? I mean, he's kind of bizarre, talking about wormholes in his brain. And now he's apologizing for a sexual assault younger. I mean, he's just not a serious candidate. I think what you see here is he's pulling from both Biden and Trump about equally, according to the polls. And I think the Trump people like, his anti-vax positions and his border position and his Israel position. And then a lot of people left on the more progressive side, but also probably on the right, they are just thinking of the Kennedy name, which is a more liberal family tradition. Robert Kennedy Sr., Ted Kennedy, even John Kennedy. A lot more progressive than Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So I think he's a wild card in the race. He could pull from both sides, or he could end up pulling from one side. But the only thing I'll say in defense of him is he should be on the ballot. It should be up to the voters to decide. And the way the Democrats are going after him is as disgusting as the way they're going after Jill Stein. Z Manny, what did you think of yesterday's free and equal debate? In my opinion, Randall wasn't representing his party, just doing some solo shtick. And Chase wasn't talking realistically about corporate rule. I haven't had a chance to look at it. I actually spent much of the day, and on a thread. Jill was asking questions about talking points, and a number of us who are helping with messaging and policy were responding. And I don't even know if the questions we discussed came up. I really haven't heard anything yet. I do plan to look at it, but it was not really her. The way it was set up was not, very flattering to the Green Party or respectful to the Green Party, because, she was in a debate with these two other candidates, the anti-abortion guy, Randall Terry, and the libertarian, Chase Oliver. But Robert Kennedy got to speak to the whole gathering without having to, go back and forth in a debate. And there was talk that Cornel West would get the same treatment, but I don't know if he showed up or did that. Um, so, that is not friendly territory. Free and Equal is really kind of a libertarian kind of outfit. The Freedom Fest, that's a libertarian event. So, but on the other hand, if I was Jill, I would have showed up too. I did it when I was running to those events that Free and Equal put on, partly because we didn't have a lot of events we were invited to, certainly not the debates between Biden and Trump. And, the audience is not just those who show up at the Freedom Fest, the libertarian crowd. It's people that watch it online. And so it's an opportunity to reach those people. So I hope Jill did a good job. I just haven't heard any feedback yet and haven't had a chance to look myself. Z-Manny, okay, then could we talk a bit about the Libertarian and Constitution parties, Ray, their background and approach? Curious to hear your thoughts on that. Okay, well, the Libertarians have been around since 1972, and they're pretty consistent. They are free market fundamentalists who think markets are always rational and you get the best outcomes when goods and services are distributed through the market, which I think is just nuts. It's wishful thinking, utopian thinking, in the negative sense of utopian. It's just not in touch with reality. There are other issues where, we do agree with the libertarians on free speech, cutting corporate welfare, cutting back, military interventionism and the military budget, reforming the drug laws so they are more aimed at harm reduction than criminalization and imprisonment and incarceration. And we agree on fair ballot access, and with most libertarians with ranked choice voting and proportional representation. So, in New York, I work with libertarians on those issues where we agree in single issue campaigns, not in election campaigns. But I think their free market fundamentalism is just cloud cuckoo land. Now, the Constitution Party is, very right wing, and particularly on the social questions. They're anti-LGBTQ, they're anti-abortion. They're I don't know what their economic policies are, but they're fiscally conservative and don't want to provide social programs that benefit the masses of people. So they're just a right-wing party, and they've kind of been the place where the far righters who can't stomach the Republicans for compromising on their questions coalesce. But they've been hurt by the Trump era. The MAGA Republicans are kind of stealing the thunder from the Constitution Party. So those are my thoughts. At war with us, are you as disheartened as I am that the Gaza protest vote will be split between Cornel West, Jill Stein, and Claudia de la Cruz? Is it too late for progressives to settle on one candidate? Yeah, I think it is. I mean, Cornel kind of closed the door on that when he left the Green Party and then said he didn't trust, I think he said he didn't trust Jill Stein. And the bigger reason he gave, or the more common reason, was he wanted to go straight to the people instead of having to campaign state by state for delegates. But that was baffling because he had no serious competition for the Green Party nomination at that time. This is in, June through October last year. And it's not, speaking to the various state parties is part of building your campaign, getting people enthusiastic, mobilized, as well as getting delegates to the national convention. And then when he, left the Green Party, he left the ballot in most states. He just seemed to not grasp that the 20 or so ballot lines the Green Party already had, and our existing volunteer base and organizing infrastructure to get on maybe another 20 or more ballot lines, he couldn't build that from scratch. So at this point, he's on 6 or 8 states. Some of those are contested. I think he'll be doing good to get on 12 or 15. He's not going to be on the ballot in most states. But I don't think he'll come back to the Green Party. I have some communications with him. There was actually the guy that did a lot of the number crunching and narrative for the Eco-Socialist Green New Deal asked me if, I would ask Cornell if he wanted a briefing on that. Cornell said he's too busy, so that's not going to happen. But, so I'm occasionally in touch with Cornell, but I see no indication he'll come back. Jill opened the door when she announced she was running. She said, she'd love to have Cornel West as the VP candidate, and in fact, had asked him in 2016. Then West was supporting first. He supported Bernie Sanders in the primary, and then belatedly endorsed Jill Stein. I did in 2020 endorse Biden. So I don't know. But Jill opened the door, and seems to me Cornell slammed it closed. Claudia de la Cruz, she has very different politics than I think the Greens and Cornel West do, because she's from a party that is at best apologetic and often enthusiastic about authoritarian one-party states like North Korea and Eritrea and China. And, if you're trying to build a socialist movement in the United States and you say that's socialism, most people in this country believe in democracy. They're not going to go for that. So it's a very different kind of politics. And it's a vanguard party, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, not a mass party. So it's very top down. It's just not the kind of, grassroots mass party that we need. So I don't think unity there would, politically, that's a bridge too far as I'm concerned. Look, the reality is, Claudia is not showing up in the polls. Nobody's polling for her. The Party for Social and Liberation usually comes in fifth or sixth, far behind the Greens. Cornell and Jill are now polling between 1% and 2%. They seem to get a bump the first few days after the debate debacle that Biden had, but seem to have gone back down again. And the pressure to vote for the lesser evil on progressives, particularly in the battleground states, is only going to intensify these last 4 months of the campaign. So, we're looking at a vote that is, maybe 1% between them, or maybe 2% between them, West and Stein. And that won't be nothing. That will be representing about 1 million votes or more. But out of, what was it last time? 120 million? It's not going to impact the election unless it happen to be the margin in a battleground state. And how much it will affect the debate, not that much. I mean, another factor here is when people are polled, what's at the top of their agendas? It's the economy, it's immigration, thanks to the Republicans harping on that. It's the climate, it's economic security, it's healthcare, housing. Gaza's way down the list, so it's not a big issue for a lot of people. It will be a big issue in Michigan, where there are a lot of Palestinians and other Arab and Muslim people, and a lot of them are disgusted with Joe Biden. So, but that's Joe Biden's doing. That's not the doing of Jill Stein or Cornel West. So I don't think the presidential protest vote on Gaza is where we need to be. We need to be in those congressional races, like I was talking about earlier, making it an issue they can't avoid, persuading people that we run into in those debates that we got to stop supporting genocide. There's, we need diplomacy. We need serious movement away from apartheid and occupation toward a two-state or even a one-state solution. That's up to them to negotiate. But there's got to be a political process, and do this diplomatically, not by military force. And the U.S. policy needs to change 180 degrees to make that happen. We can put that into the congressional races. Like I said, they're much more accessible. So, I urge you to vote for Jill Stein and the Green Party. If they're on your ballot, write them in if they're not, if you can, in your state. But I'd put more energy into the House races if you're concerned about Gaza or any other national issue. Rob D. Rich, thoughts on the Communist Party USA purging members for making a petition to not endorse Biden? Well, I blame the CP, the Communist Party, for destroying independent left politics in this country. in 1936. The policy of the Communist International was called the Popular Front, and that was where the left was supposed to go into coalition with the pro-democracy bourgeoisie, the liberal capitalist parties against the fascist parties. And in the United States, the way they interpreted that was get behind Roosevelt to stop the quote unquote fascist Republicans. Back then, the Republicans weren't fascist. They were conservative, but they were diverse. I mean, there was liberals in the Republican Party. You had progressives like the La Follette progressives. It was a very different time. But since then, the left and the labor unions went into the Democratic Party in 1936 and really haven't come out since then. So independent left politics was really undermined by that. So it doesn't surprise me that they're purging members who won't endorse Biden. I mean, that is, as far as I'm concerned, they left the socialist tradition a long time ago, which, since 1848, when Marx and Engels speaking to the Communist League that became the First International, it was a statement that we need our own party. The workers' movement needs its own party. Nobody can speak for us. Because what happened in 1848 during those revolutions that swept across Europe, the springtime of the peoples, they called it, and it spread to Canada and a couple countries in Latin America. And they were trying to, get parliamentary democracies and voting rights for workers. And they got sold out by the middle class. So the professionals and the small business people, and even big business people who were with them against the landed elites and the old feudal remnants of the feudal system. But when those landed elites gave some concessions to the middle class professionals and business people, they sold the workers out. The conclusion of the workers' movement was we need our own party. We need to act and speak on our own behalf to liberate ourselves. And I believe that holds true to this day. The communists lost that, almost 88 years ago. 1936 was 88 years ago. So, the communists are an aging group of Democrats. It's sad. See, Manny, Greens seemed like the only party that has a full comprehensive governing vision that speaks clearly and directly in terms of how the political process actually works and aiming for clear outcomes. Is that the end of the comment or does it continue? Well, I'll comment on that. You said that in past tense. I hope you meant they still seem that way. And I think you're right in general terms, although I think we have much room for improvement in terms of really our political strategy. We don't have a coherent strategy. I was just suggesting that when we're trying to influence national politics, we need to focus on the House. And as I've said many times, to get to the point where we can do that effectively, we've got to have elected local officials. So we're credible as people that can win elections and can be responsible and effective in office. And then when we run people for the congressional level, that's the foundation for a serious campaign. So I think the Greens need to get back to what has been at least, nominally our strategy, build from the bottom up. But it seems like since 2016, we've lost some of that. I think between the push of Trump and the pull of Sanders into the Democratic Party, subsequent, demoralization at some of the grassroots, we've lost that focus and lost our confidence that we can win these local races and we can, really build something. And I think we got to get that back. But other than that, we do have a comprehensive program. It's clear and direct. I would quibble with this and that in it, but it's pretty damn good. And clear outcomes, maybe that's where I'm saying we need to be clearer. And I think right now we need to really up our game in local elections and from there, state legislative and House of Representative elections. Rob D. Rich, what do you think about the DNC convention having Biden accept virtually. I think that's a terrible idea, and certainly the Biden campaign. I think what you're referring to is at an early date. I think it's the end of July. Um, the delegates will have a virtual vote, so they can go into the convention with everything decided. Everything decided, and then the convention just becomes a staged show, which I don't think that many people are going to watch. They maybe watch it to see if Biden, when he speaks, is coherent, given the questions about him. Contrast that with if they were having a competitive, open convention where the delegates had to debate, whether it should go to Harris or Gavin Newsom or Gretchen Whitmer. Or the Democrats have a pretty long bench of candidates in their mode. It's not politics I support, but they would be credible. I think more credible against Trump. So doing the virtual convention ahead of time, they call it the robot rule in the Democratic Party. Once you're a committed delegate to the, whatever candidate, you have to vote that way in the first round. They have to vote like robots. I mean, it even means if Joe Biden drops dead, they got to vote for Joe Biden. And we've had elections in this country where dead people get elected because people fear the alternative more. It's happened. So, the Greens have the robot rule too, which I think is something we need to change because circumstances can change as you approach a convention. The candidate that may be popular and doing well, may have some skeletons in their closet that come out, as we come up to the convention. And, it's just not the candidate we want. We should not be like robots having to vote for that the candidates we're committed to before the convention. We should be pledged to them. And the candidates themselves should be able to pick who those delegates are in each state. We're not good about doing that. But robot rules just create inflexibility. And I think the Greens are, tend that way like the Democrats and Republicans. I was talking about earlier, they're very cautious and conservative. They don't want to rock the boat and upset the power structure in the party. And, Greens like to avoid controversy and debate to a certain extent. And I think that's wrong. It's better to get things out on the table, debate them out, see what people think, then take a vote, and the majority carries the policy. That's better than like trying to put it under the cover because it doesn't go away. It festers, and it, instead of coming out in a deliberative way in a debate, it can explode and people get angry and point fingers, and it's worse. So long answer to what I think about the virtual vote nominating Biden, but my basic thought on it is it's not a good idea, particularly now given the questions about his health. Via email, are you going to be following the RNC convention next week? Yes, I am. I have been asked to comment on Pacifica Radio. Tuesday might be the day. They suggested that, although I have another meeting at that time, but I told them I'd get off that call to take their call. So I'll be watching it at least to be intelligent when I'm asked for my perspective on the convention. And so I'm going to be watching it for that reason, probably more than I would have had I not been asked to go on Pacifica Radio and provide some commentary. So, yep, I'm going to watch it. I guess if I can watch carnage in Gaza to see what's going on, I can, watch this RNC convention where a lot of what they say is going to be offensive to me. But, it's better to know what your enemy's planning for you than to be ignorant. John Colton. How can I reconcile support for Jill Stein's presidential campaign with their position on the Ukrainian war, which I consider to be hidden Stalinism? Well, as I said earlier, I'm voting for the Green Party more to, support it as the only national alternative on the left that has ballot lines, has an infrastructure, than for Jill Stein, because it's really, hard to stomach a vote given what she's been saying about Ukraine. I mean, she was in Newsweek last week saying it's a war, something like it's a war the U.S. started, which is ignorant and, contentious and just cringeworthy. I mean, that is not what I like to see coming from the head of the ticket. But, I can vote for Genocide Joe. No, I'm not going to do that. Trump, no. I said what I thought was wrong with Claudia de la Cruz. And uh, Cornel West is running a one-off campaign for himself, not for building a political alternative. So I would suggest you reconcile your support saying this is a vote for the Green Party and what it stands for. In some states, if we get enough votes, it'll maintain our ballot line in this election cycle for the next election cycle. And it will show people the Green Party has some support. So, that's how I'm doing it. It's not easy. I mean, I feel less enthusiastic about this vote than, any I've really taken, going back to 1972 when I could first vote. In 1968, when I was too young to vote, but I was supporting the Peace and Freedom Party. But that's where we are. Scout Trooper 164, I really hate this idea of something U.S. bad, therefore foreign country good. Can we please stop this selective anti-imperialism, Howie? I hate the Greens are divided by this. Yeah, selective anti-imperialism is a good way to put it. We oppose U.S. imperialism, but not we. Some people in the Greens oppose U.S. imperialism like we all do, but not Russian imperialism. And, I think it's a phony anti-imperialism. I call it vulgar anti-imperialism. In the Marxian tradition, there's criticism of old Stalinist Marxism, which said if you have state ownership of the means of production, you have socialism, which would make, Saudi Arabia a socialist country because the kingdom owns Aramco, owns most of it. And that's the biggest industry in the country. They say that no matter how exploitative, repressive, and even imperialist these U.S. states are, they support them because they're in conflict with the U.S. And, why can't we be independent of both bads and support a good? National liberation for oppressed nations, their right of self-determination, and against any country that tries to dominate another country by forceful military means. We need to be consistent anti-imperialists. So, Scout Trooper 164, we just got to keep, patiently explaining our position to people. I find if those of you that may be on the national committee list, I'm on constant debate with these people there. And there are not that many of them, but they're constant, and they keep addressing it to me personally. And people occasionally speak up on my side. Mostly I get private communications from people saying, I agree with you, keep it up. And I ask them, well, why don't you say something? And they say, well, number one, I'm not as informed. And okay, but you could do some research. But the other thing is they don't want to be targets because the pro-Russian faction is, they do a lot of personal invective, which, you got to have a thick skin if you're going to be in politics and be serious about it. You just can't run from that crap. You got to answer it. So, yeah, I am very frustrated, Scout Trooper 164. We're the only Green Party in the world that's confused about Ukraine. It's a shame. But it's not just the Greens. DSA, a lot of the peace groups, they're confused too. And it's not surprising because, U.S. imperialism has been so vicious from Vietnam to Iraq to Gaza today. So if you just say whatever the U.S. is doing must be wrong, you're going to be right most of the time. But you can't look at things that way. You got to look at each situation as it is. And Ukraine is a very different situation. I mean, I criticize the U.S. for not providing weapon systems that Ukraine asked for in a timely way, holding back, delaying. They're still holding back on letting Ukraine use longer range missiles to attack the air bases that are raining glide bombs down on Ukraine to great devastation. being able to strike those is defensive. It's trying to stop them from bombing your own country. So the U.S. is kind of keeping Ukraine fighting with one hand tied behind their back. I'm critical of that too. I'm critical of the fact that the Ukrainian left, the labor unions, environmental groups have been asking for the West, the Western left, to support them in their demand to cancel Ukraine's unjust foreign debt, most of which was accumulated under Yanukovych before the revolution of dignity, had him flee the country. And the private bond market gave Ukraine a couple years of a pardon. But now they're saying, and it ends at the end of this month, they're saying you got to pay up. And they're offering a 20% cut in what Ukraine owes. Ukraine's asking for 40%. But where the hell is the United States government, which has a lot of influence with the bondholders? They did pass a law early in the war asking the Treasury Department to put pressure on the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank to, provide debt relief from their loans to Ukraine. And they're supposed to report at the end of last year. I haven't seen news on that. I haven't tried to dig up the report, if it even got filed. A lot of times you pass laws and things don't happen. But anyway, that's, if you oppose U.S. imperialism, that financial economic neocolonialism is, the real strength of Western imperialism and its exploitation of countries in the global South. And the Ukrainian lefties will tell you we're the most northern country of the global South. Ukraine is very poor and it's been exploited. So I guess I'm saying to the campus that support Russia, you're not really opposing U.S. imperialism if you're not calling for cancellation of that foreign debt. Your hypocrisy is blatant. Any thoughts about that? Finally, the media is talking more about Project 2025 and Trump pretending not to know about what the Heritage Foundation has done. Yeah, that's typical Trump. It's like if it looks bad, he says, I know nothing about it, even though everybody knows he knows everything about it. And a lot of people, that's why Biden still has a chance, even if he, wheeled in on a wheelchair to his next inauguration. He could still be Trump because Trump, says these blatant lies. And, when people finally vote, a lot of them are going to say, I just can't go with that. And the media talking about Project 2025 is good. Although I think the more potent issue, because it's a little bit wonky and, people that follow politics will know what Project 2025 is, or they'll listen to what it is. Most people want to know, where the candidates stand on women's right to choose, on Social Security, on how they're going to fight inflation, how are they going to deal with the border. A little more down the list, how they got a program for the climate. I think those issues, particularly the ones that affect people's, kitchen table issues, are the top issues. But I think it's good that they're talking about, the Trump administration, and Trump, and he hasn't backed away from this. He's going to purge the civil service and replace, technically competent, people with political hacks that will do his bidding. They're talking about purging 50,000 federal workers that now have civil service protection. They got that introduced in the late 19th century because there was so much damn corruption when new administrations came in. So this is an invitation to corruption. He's talked about deporting undocumented immigrants, which might mean their families with them who are, U.S. citizens. And I've seen figures from, like 11.1 million undocumented immigrants that they count to figures as high as 20 million that they plan to deport. That is, I don't know if Stalin ever deported that many people in total even. It's just a crime against humanity that Trump is promising. So you don't even have to list or read what Project 2025 is saying. You just have to listen to Trump. And so, I'm glad it's being talked about. I think a lot of people have been informed about it, and hopefully it helps defeat Trump. Via email, thoughts on Facebook lifting their ban on Trump, citing users' right to hear from candidates. Yeah, I guess all the social media are lifting the ban. I guess I agree. He's a candidate, and I'd rather err on the side of letting, nonsense get out from stupid candidates like Trump than having Facebook, a big private organization, or the government decide what we can and cannot hear. But that just puts the onus on us to be engaged and corrected the nonsense that will come from Trump and his minions. And no doubt, uh, disinformation campaigns promulgated by bots. We saw a lot of that from the Russians in 2016. CIA just said they're seeing it again this election. We've seen it in the European elections. And I think, the best way, as always, to combat nonsense is with good sense. So we just got to, not let that demoralize us and silence us. We got to be active and confident that, we can win people over with good arguments and, a respectful tone. Scout Trooper 164, what do you think with the FBI discovering Russian bot camps spreading propaganda? Glad that some effort to find these guys is being made, but it's slow as hell. Yeah, you're always one step behind because, they can get caught here and they pop up there. And, if the FBI discovered them, I don't think it's hard. I mean, I remember seeing messaging coming from supposed black sites urging a vote for Jill Stein. They just raised flags for me. They popped up in the last week or two of the campaign, came from accounts and groups I'd never heard of, and I'm very active in politics. And I just thought, there's something weird about this. And it turns out, they were fronts for the Russians. So, you've got to have your wits about you, be, critical media consumers, and urge everybody you can talk to do the same. We got to beat them with smarts, not repression. And we're always going to be a step behind, but when we find out what's going on, we need to speak up about it. John Cothan, how can I get copies of Socialists Should Advance Our Own Politics in 2024? Well, it's online. Let's put the link back in the chat again. And it won't be in the print edition of New Politics. This is basically their blog, their online webzine. They do have a print article in the current issue of New Politics, an earlier article I wrote about the campaign. I think it was called Jill Stein, or it was called Cornel West, Jill Stein in the 2024 presidential election. I think that's online too, or it's in the current print edition of New Politics. So that's it. Get it online. If you want to, give copies away, go to a printer, a photocopier, and print some copies. I'd appreciate that. And, we'll see what people think. I tell you, I struggled with that. I mean, I think it was Scout Trooper 164, or maybe it was you that asked, how can you reconcile voting for Jill Stein given her position on Ukraine? And it was tough. It's kind of a balance sheet thing. And on balance, the best vote is the green vote for me. Scout Trooper 164, Clarence Thomas apparently might be looked at since he has been getting money from Russia as early as 2003. I hope they do something about this. Any thoughts? I've just heard about the money from the rich guys in this country. I didn't hear about money from Russia. I'm going to have to do a little Googling to see what that's about. That's a new thought. And, then my next question is, if it's true, who was it in Russia and what did they want from Clarence Thomas? I expect it was a rich capitalist in Russia who was trying to get some decision made by the Supreme Court. But anyway, I'll check that out. But anyway, it's the first I've heard of that. Frankie Lee, can you bring back Christina Amini Khalil to the show before the election? Yeah, I mean, we talked about that. The ball was in her court. She was still getting some of her campaign together and getting on the ballot. I have another New Jersey candidate who was the one that called me during the podcast, who I think we'll have on next Saturday. He's a candidate for Congress. If we do work that out, I won't say his name now because I won't announce it till we know he's got a date. But yeah, so I think we'll have Christina back, and I'm just waiting for her. She was trying to get some of her ducks in a row before coming back on. One of which was ballot line, which I assume she got. I haven't seen a list of the New Jersey candidates, but they were going for every House seat. Jill Stein for president and Christina for U.S. Senate. So, last I heard, they were meeting their goals, and the ballot access in New Jersey is pretty reasonable. To get an independent candidate on the ballot, to get a party line in automatic ballot access is very difficult. You have to get something like 10% of the vote across all state assembly races in a state assembly election, which is a really high standard. You got to run a lot of candidates and get a good vote. That's why I don't think, since there's been a third party on the ballot in New Jersey since that law passed, and I think it was in, the Woodrow Wilson era. Don't quote me on that, but it's been a long time. Okay, well, we've run out of time again. I'm hoping next week to have a Green congressional candidate, and we can talk about the issues this person is running on and what that means for the overall political situation. The following Saturday, I expect to be in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, helping the Pennsylvania Greens finish their petition for their statewide candidates. And I did that 2 years ago, and I had a podcast with Jubilin X. Williams in the public library there in Harrisburg. Did I say Philadelphia? I'll be in Harrisburg at the Capitol. There's a Pride event that's a good place to petition at. And that's where we were 2 years ago. And so I'll maybe have a Pennsylvania Green with me for that podcast in 2 weeks. And that's as far out as I'm planning at this point. But there'll be plenty to talk about. We got the Republican convention, then we got the Green convention, followed immediately by the Democratic convention. Will that be open or a coronation of Biden? There's a lot of balls up in the air. So I appreciate people being here. I'm glad to see some new folks or old folks, but haven't been on recently, asking questions and making comments. And we'll keep talking again next week at the same time. Next Saturday, 3 p.m. Eastern time. So have a good week, everybody.